Hello, my amazing viewers. Today, I have something truly inspiring to share with you. A story that will not only improve your English, but also leave you feeling more motivated than ever. After hearing this story, you'll look at your own problems and realize how small they really are. The strength, courage, and determination you're going to hear about will make you believe that anything is possible if you don't give up. This is the incredible story of a woman who faced many challenges, but instead of letting them defeat her, she overcame them and achieved greatness. She is Helen Keller, and her journey from darkness and silence to becoming a symbol of hope and success will amaze you. Before we start, please make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me what you learned from this powerful story. I'm sure you'll feel as inspired as I do after hearing about Helen's amazing life. Let's dive in. Helen Keller was born on June 27, 1880, in a small town called Tuscumbia, Alabama, USA. She grew up in a peaceful home with a loving family. Her parents, Arthur and Kate Keller, were excited to have a baby girl and named her Helen Adams Keller. Little did they know, their precious child would face a huge challenge no one could have imagined. When Helen was just 19 months old, she became very sick. No one knew exactly what the illness was, but it was serious, possibly something like scarlet fever or meningitis. This illness took away Helen's ability to see and hear. Imagine that. At such a young age, she could no longer see her parents' faces or hear their voices. The world suddenly became silent and dark for her. For any child, sight and hearing are the main ways we connect with the world. But for Helen, everything she once knew became a mystery. She couldn't hear people speak, and she couldn't see anything around her. Can you imagine the pain and frustration she must have felt? It's something most of us can't fully understand. As Helen grew older, she became frustrated. She couldn't communicate her needs, and her parents didn't know how to help her. It was like she was trapped in a world where no one understood her. She would often get angry and have tantrums. Imagine being a young girl who can't talk, can't hear, and can't understand anything around her. How do you think she felt? Helen was confused, sad, and angry all at once. But deep inside her, there was a strong spirit. And that spirit was about to change everything. One of the hardest things about being a child is learning how to communicate, right? For most of us, it's easy. We speak, we listen. We see people's faces and understand what they mean. But for Helen, it was all a puzzle. She had to figure out how to communicate on her own. It was an incredibly difficult journey. But Helen was about to meet someone who would change her life forever. That person was Anne Sullivan, a teacher who came to Helen when she was about 7 years old. Anne was also partially blind, so she understood what it was like to struggle. But she was determined to help Helen see the world in a new way. Even though it was hard, Anne didn't give up on Helen. She was patient, kind, and passionate about teaching. On the first day they met, Anne showed Helen how to communicate by spelling words into her hand. It was slow and hard work, but Anne kept at it. Can you imagine how difficult that must have been for Helen? She couldn't see Anne's face, and she couldn't hear her voice. Everything Anne did had to be shown in a way Helen could feel. One of the most famous moments in Helen's life came when Anne placed Helen's hand under running water and spelled "water" into her palm. Suddenly, something amazing happened. Helen understood. She realized that the word Anne had spelled out was connected to the water she was feeling. It was like the world had opened up for her in a way she could finally understand. From that day on, Helen was determined to learn everything she could. Helen's journey wasn't easy. She lived in a world where most people couldn't imagine how someone like her could live, let alone succeed. But Anne worked hard with her every day. It was a long process, but Helen wasn't afraid of hard work. She had something powerful inside her, a desire to learn and connect with the world, no matter how hard it seemed. Every day, Anne would spell words into Helen's hand, and Helen would feel the objects they were connected to. For example, if Anne spelled the word flower, she would guide Helen's hand to touch a real flower, so Helen could feel it and understand the word. Helen didn't just want to learn words. She wanted to learn how to read and write. Since she couldn't see, she used a special system called Braille, which lets blind people read and write using raised dots that they can feel with their fingers. Can you imagine trying to read and write without using your eyes? How hard would that be? But Helen was determined. She didn't let her blindness stop her. Anne didn't just teach Helen to read and write. She also helped her learn to speak. Imagine trying to speak without being able to hear your own voice. But Anne showed Helen how to feel the vibrations in her throat when she made sounds. Over time, Helen was able to say words and communicate with others. At first, her speech was hard to understand, but with Anne's patience, Helen's voice became clearer. By the time Helen was 10 years old, she had already learned so much. She wasn't just a child who couldn't see or hear. She was a student, a learner, a person full of knowledge and ideas. But Helen didn't stop there. She dreamed of something bigger. She wanted to go to school like other kids her age. In 1894, at 14 years old, Helen went to the Perkins School for the Blind in New York, and she did something no one expected. She succeeded. She worked harder than ever before and learned more than anyone thought possible. Later, Helen was accepted to Radcliffe College, a prestigious school for women in the U.S. This was an incredible achievement, especially because she was blind and deaf. But Helen wasn't just happy to be in school. She was determined to do her best. With a lot of help from Anne, who continued to teach her, Helen spent hours each day learning new things. It was hard work, but Helen never gave up. She graduated from Radcliffe College in 1904 and became the first person who was both blind and deaf to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. Can you imagine how proud she must have been? This was a huge moment for her and for the world, showing that even the greatest challenges could be overcome with determination. Helen didn't stop there. She was passionate about using her voice to help others. She began giving speeches about her life, sharing her journey of overcoming difficulties, and encouraging people who face their own struggles to keep going. Through her writing and speaking, Helen became an influential figure who inspired millions of people around the world. She also became an advocate, fighting for the rights of people with disabilities, pushing for better education, better treatment, and equal rights. Her voice became one of the strongest in the fight for the rights of disabled people. Helen's life wasn't just about work. It was also about love. She shared a deep friendship with Anne Sullivan, who was more than just a teacher to her. Anne was a lifelong companion and supporter. Helen was also close to her family, and together, they celebrated her incredible accomplishments. Helen's life teaches us that no obstacle is too big to overcome. Even after graduation, her most powerful work began. Helen was determined to show the world that people with disabilities could do anything they set their minds to, just like anyone else. One of the first things Helen did after school was start writing. She had so many stories to tell about her life, her struggles, and her victories. Her first book, The Story of My Life, was published in 1903. It went on to inspire people all over the world. In the book, she openly shared the challenges she faced, the frustrations, and the doubts she sometimes had about herself. But most importantly, she showed how she overcame those difficulties. She explained how she used her other senses, touch, smell, and taste, to experience the world in ways most people could never imagine. Her book became an inspiration to millions, showing that no matter how tough life gets, we can always adapt and survive. Helen wasn't just a writer, she was also a speaker. She traveled the world, giving talks about the importance of education for people with disabilities and the need for society to pay more attention to their needs. She didn't just talk about overcoming difficulties. She lived it every day. Helen became one of the most famous women in the world, but even with her international fame, she stayed humble. She never considered herself a superhero or someone special. She always believed that anyone, no matter their circumstances, could achieve great things if they didn't give up. Helen's greatest message was about helping others. She fought for the rights of disabled people, traveling the world to give speeches and working with governments and organizations to improve the lives of people with disabilities. She believed that everyone deserved a chance to succeed, no matter their circumstances. But Helen's life wasn't only about work. She also enjoyed the simple things. Even though she couldn't see or hear, she loved feeling the warmth of the sun, the cool breeze on her face, and the joy of having a good conversation with friends and family. Helen had a strong belief in the power of service and giving back to the world. She dedicated much of her life to causes like the American Foundation for the Blind, where she worked to improve the lives of blind people. She believed that by helping others, we could make the world a better place. In 1936, Helen lost. This was a very painful time for Helen. Anne had been not just her teacher, but a lifelong friend. Losing Anne felt like losing a part of herself. But even in her sadness, Helen didn't give up. She continued her work, knowing that Anne would have wanted her to keep moving forward. As Helen got older, her health began to decline. She continued traveling and speaking, but she knew her time was limited. However, Helen wasn't afraid. She had lived an extraordinary life full of challenges, accomplishments, and triumphs. Even in her later years, she kept showing others the most important lesson of all: never give up. Helen's mind stayed sharp, and she continued to read, write, and learn, even in her final years. She stayed aware of current events and the struggles of people with disabilities. She continued to fight for the rights of women, civil rights, and human equality, values she had worked for all her life. In 1961, Helen Keller suffered a stroke that affected her health. But as always, she didn't let that stop her. She kept inspiring others, often receiving letters from people around the world, telling her how much her story had impacted their lives. Even when times were tough, Helen chose to shine and help others. Helen passed away in 1968 at the age of 87, marking the end of a life lived with incredible determination. But her legacy lives on, continuing to inspire people for generations to come. Helen Keller's words were not just words, they were lessons for the world. She proved that anything is possible, even when it seems impossible. Her life will always be a reminder to never give up and to believe in yourself.